West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Morehouse College was founded in 1867. It is a private, historically black, men's liberal arts college in Atlanta, Georgia, where they say leadership is learned and legends are born. It's the place where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. studied. It is the place where Union soldiers died for freedom in America. And today, Morehouse College was the place where Governor Wes Moore, the first black governor of Maryland and only the third black governor ever elected in America's history, came with a simple but powerful message for the men of Morehouse. Our history is our power. The Morehouse graduates are continuing the HBCU tradition of making history and forging a brighter future. But the world these latest graduates are setting out to change, some in it are hell-bent on eroding their power and potential. How? Well, take Florida. Just days ago, Governor Ron DeSantis signed legislation banning public funds for teaching or supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the state's universities. He'd already limited the teaching of Black history or even discussing LGBTQ issues in elementary and high schools. Things have gotten so bad, the NAACP just issued a travel advisory for the Sunshine State. Writing this, Florida is openly hostile toward African Americans, people of color, and LGBTQ plus individuals. Before traveling to Florida, please understand that the state of Florida devalues and marginalizes the contributions of and the challenges faced by African Americans and other communities of color. The thing is, y'all, Florida is definitely not alone. Similar efforts to limit how race or racism is taught are underway in Virginia, in Arkansas, and several other states. We are seeing books being banned. Teachers are restricted in what they can say about gender identity. As the 396 newest Morehouse men prepared to forge their path in this current political climate, another history maker addressed them. The 63rd governor of Maryland and currently the only black governor of any state in the nation, yes, Wes Moore. Take a listen.
This is not about a fear of making people feel bad. It is about a fear of people understanding their power. I fear we are watching the early decay of a deep rot that threatens to hollow out our future by eliminating our past. Those who yearn to destroy history will not stop at our history. They will go after the history of those we know too. I can think of few greater threats to this nation than this threat to history. Because this threat is going to have lasting consequences. Not only because those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it, but because those who do not learn their past will never learn their own power.
Earlier today, and just after Governor Moore delivered that speech, I had a chance to speak to him, and I asked him what he wanted to convey when he told the graduates that history is their power. Take a listen.
I wanted for all the graduates to know that their power is in their history. that they are standing there not because of their hard work alone, but because there were people who were willing to do the work before them, that there were people who were willing to fight on behalf of them, people who didn't even know who they were, but people who were willing to fight on the hope of them, right? On the hope that they could do what it is that they were doing that day. And at a time when we are watching politicians and elected officials who are seemingly attacking history, who are telling us what we should be reading, telling us what part of history is important and what part of history is not, that I charge those graduates to be able to push back, to embrace your history unabashedly and unapologetically. Because if you understand your history, you know there's nothing standing in front of you that you cannot accomplish. If you know where it is you came from, you know that there's no place that anyone else can determine about where you can go. And so the importance of understanding history, embracing history, but then also defending history when people want to push back against it is something that I want for each and every one of these graduates to be able to take personally.
You know, you talk about politicians, and there's an excerpt in the speech where you specifically talk about politicians who are banning books. I wonder, do you have any one specific in mind when you wrote those words and even when you said them today?
Well, the problem, Simone, is that I wish there was one. It's not. There's a whole legion of them now. Who are making sure that teachers are getting suspended because they are showing a movie, a Disney movie that has a gay character, that we have curriculum that is being challenged, and entire school systems that are now being told, if you talk about everything from the transatlantic slave trade to the Holocaust, that we're going to pull your funding. It's not just one. We're watching an all-out assault now that on the basic fabric of history. And the thing that I think that I want people to understand is it's not going to stop unless we stop it. It is not going to stop unless we are unapologetic in the way that we condemn it, and unless we are going to be forceful in making sure that our history should not just be learned and understood, but that our history should be defended and uplifted. And that is something that I want for all states to be able to model. And I know here in the state of Maryland, that is very much our approach. That is very much the way that I'm leading. And we are applauding the other governors around the country and the other lawmakers that are pushing towards making sure that our history can be appreciated and understood, and not just the history of some, but the history of all. That's what makes our fabric. That's what makes our national mosaic so beautiful and so uplifting.
I want to read for our viewers. When you talk about our history, you make the case in this speech that it is more than just one community, that everyone is in it together. You say this: those who yearn to destroy history will not stop at our history. They will go after the history of those we know. I'm talking about our friends in the indigenous community. I'm talking about our friends in the Jewish community. I'm talking about our friends in the Asian community. You go on to cite the gay community. You go on to talk about our mothers and daughters and sisters. You say, I'm talking about everyone in this country who has been a part of the American story and who are watching the stories of those who came before them wiped away. A threat to any history is a threat to all history. Governor, across this country right now, it is legal in many places, accepted, if you will, for, you talked about it. You cited the teacher who is currently under investigation in Florida for showing her students a Disney movie that had a gay character in it. There are teachers, educators who are scared to just tell the truth in the classroom for fear of losing their jobs. What is the answer here? Because it feels like we're only spiraling deeper into this. I don't even think division is the right word.
Yeah. I think the answer and what we have to do is, one, we have to be able to make sure that we have laws in place that are going to protect individuals who are teaching history, that we can have laws in place that allow for the proper teaching of a holistic history to be something that can be supported and something that we are going to make sure is legally defendable. But the other thing is, too, there need to be economic consequences. And so I saw where recently the NAACP has just put a travel advisory on the state of Florida. And the travel advisory was exclusively around this banning of history and this altering and erasure of the history of African Americans. And I say this, we need to make bigotry expensive. We need to make sure that people know that if we can actually confront it and say, don't spend your dollars in states that are going to ban history. Don't spend your dollars in states. Don't move your businesses in states. Don't be an entrepreneur in a state where you know the broad and beautiful history of the people of that state are not going to be heard or respected. Go to a state that is. I'm asking all people right now, if you are in a place that you have leaders, so-called leaders, who are going to condemn or erase the history of broad portions of the population there, come to Maryland. Come to a state where we are going to not just defend it, but we are going to uplift the beautiful mosaic, the beautiful history of everybody, where we are not leaving people behind, and we're making sure that all people in our state are going to be seen and respected. So we've got to be able to make sure that we have laws that are going to protect the teaching of history. And for places that are not doing it, there has got to be an economic consequence to bigotry.
Governor, I think it is all connected. The history, what is happening in the states when it comes to the assault on abortion rights in this country, gun violence. In Maryland, you recently signed the Gun Safety Act of 2023 into law. That act actually limits the places that people can carry a firearm, and it immediately sparked a lawsuit. So how confident are you that first, that this act will withstand legal scrutiny, but do other governors need to make moves that you have made in Maryland?
I'm very confident that this is going to stand up in the courts. We were working very closely with the Attorney General Anthony Brown in the state of Maryland, who also feels very confident that this will uphold. And also, we know that what was passed are really common sense gun laws. Right. What we passed in the state of Maryland were common sense gun laws that said things like you should not be able to bring a firearm into a nursery or to a school, that you shouldn't be able to bring a firearm into a government building, that if you have a history of mental illness and a history of violence, that you should not be able to purchase a weapon. That if you have a firearm, that it needs to be safe and it needs to be secured and locked up so that minors can't get to it. I mean, these are common sense gun laws that the people of this state not only know are important, and we've been told on multiple occasions by families that these are important laws we want to get passed. One thing I've said to the people of my state is this: I'm going to be aggressive on this, because I am not going to be a governor who is just going to spend my time going to funerals and giving thoughts and prayers, but passing no pieces of legislation to actually do anything about it. I refuse to let my term go by and to say that we can watch tragedies continue to happen in our neighborhoods, and the only thing that I'm going to do is sit there and wait for Washington to do something, or allow the NRA, who sued me for the decision, allow them to determine what type of policies that I'm going to pass for my state. So public safety is the number one concern for me as the governor and for my administration. And we are going to act aggressively to make sure that people can feel safe in their own communities, in their own homes, and in their own skin. And that includes being able to focus on getting these illegal guns out of our streets and out of our communities, keeping these violent offenders out of neighborhoods. But also it means that people should not be able to carry a firearm anywhere they want to go and do anything they want to do with it. That's not safety. And I'm focused on the safety of our people.
It is Monday, the 22nd of May of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our hostess, and she will be seating you directly. And our daily special is River City Hash Mondays, because we had quite a weekend here, even in Rogue River. Looks like our little hamlet has made the international news. One of the local idiots, I call him a sundown town cracker, who has been identified, by the way, decided to go to a person's house, property in a rural part of our area, walked up quite a long gravel driveway to harass a family for having a rainbow flag in their yard. He wants to know why they decided to live in a conservative town and fly a flag, and he knows they have an agenda. Okay. And now this guy's all pissed off because their Ring camera and their phone camera documented his harassment. The cops say he didn't do anything wrong. But let me just tell you, there are scores and scores and scores of fuck Biden flags. We're not talking, Brandon flags. We're talking actual fuck Biden flags. In fact, one flew across the street from the elementary school for a couple of years. If anybody like me decided to go on those people's property, knock on their door, and complain about their flag, I would be shot. They all carry their guns. In fact, this guy had a gun. Also, he was one of the several hundred or a couple hundred who showed up to protest, heavily armed, across the street from City Hall here in Rogue River, after a black woman from a black group was invited by the city on a Thursday during workshop time to speak about systemic racism and the history of it. And that was just a step too far. Our then police chief called his friends, and they decided to protest. He was so recalcitrant and aggressive, she left that workshop frightened. Members of the community invited her to come back, decided, well, we'll just throw a barbecue at the local park, the Arboretum, called Palmer. And that was too much. Couldn't do that. We don't want these black people coming in here bringing BLM and Antifa. So the day of the barbecue, a couple hundred of these sundown town crackers, as I call them, all heavily armed, invited by the police chief, lined up across the street from City Hall and chased her off and made it very clear to all of us that basically we are in danger. All right. Rest assured that if that family had brandished a gun and chased that guy off, guess who would be visited by the cops? The cops have not visited this fellow. He has a long history of this. And I gotta say, it makes it very clear now when I moved my mom into this house. When we first moved in, within the first few days, we were inspected, visited by I still don't know who. I presumed it was maybe the local KKK coming to check us out because my mom's last name is Japanese. They wanted to know what our intent was. This guy, had a gun, insisted that he come in the house. I didn't want him in the house with a gun. But he was rather pushy. Acted like he was the welcome wagon. I didn't see any meal there to get us through the first few days, which is what the welcome wagon would do because my mom ran a welcome wagon here in Oregon for quite a few years back in the day. No, this guy was interviewing us to find out who we were, what we were up to, because this is a conservative town, apparently. So that visit makes it a lot more clear. I guess we passed muster because we're white enough. My late stepdad, as he say. I sometimes wonder how it would be if he was still around. he experienced his level or amount or more of it, of bigotry and prejudice. Highly decorated veteran. And you would not believe the racism at these VA halls directed against my late stepdad. So this guy's all pissed off. Messimer is his name. Jake. He's all pissed off because he's been identified. Hey, go on people's property and start with an agenda of your own. You're going to find out. All right. We'll see what happens. Gay couple neighbor here. I mentioned last year they were about ready to move because their house had been vandalized several times. They didn't have any outward display of them being gay, other than the fact that I guess you can tell. Cop said, it's just some kids. Right, just some kids. Get out, faggot, we're going to kill you. That didn't raise the level of concern to the cops at all. No, it didn't. But because the market's so bad, they decided they're going to have to gut it out. They did find out they have a lot of friends, though. And we look out for each other. I just don't want my dogs poisoned. You know, I have experienced violence by these. I'm just going to call them Nazis. That's what they've been all along. Had my tires slashed and then my whole car firebombed for having impeached Nixon bumper stickers in Orange County, California. My best friend, when his brother Eric ran for county supervisor in Sonoma back in the 70s, their dogs were poisoned with strychnine. That's an old tactic by the rednecks there in Sonoma County. Hell, they burned down Jack London's house in the Valley of the Moon. They didn't like his politics. He had an agenda. So this intimidation by violence is as old as a Jack London novel, even older. It's not new, except now we can expose who the perps are. All right, what do we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fine River City Hash Mondays? Maryland's first black governor, Wes Moore, told the Morehouse College class of 2023, "Our history is our power," and that's why DeSantis and others want to get rid of it. On the rest of the menu, speaking of who, Ron DeSantis insists that a federal judge be disqualified from the First Amendment lawsuit filed by Disney against the Florida governor. A small New York Christian college denies it fired 2 dorm directors for using pronouns in their email signatures, but they did fire him for that. And 30 tons of a heavily regulated component to make explosives mysteriously disappeared from a sealed rail car while in transit from Wyoming to California. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Russia brought indictments for a judge and prosecutor of the International Criminal Court who issued a war crimes warrant for Putin. And after enduring more abuse, Brazilian forward Vinicius Jr. says the Spanish Soccer League now belongs to racists. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. page at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. Across the page from that chat room link to the left, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And would you please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio? It really does help. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, if you could send those funds to us once a month, it really does help us pay our bills. And we thank you to those of you who have done so over all these many years. It really has helped us continue resisting as a powerhouse of resistance and as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. Thank you truly for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes before showtime on Daily Co's, and you can find all of those show notes and links by going to my social media feed, and there they are. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Mike Schneider out of the Associated Press. Governor Ron DeSantis is asking that a federal judge be disqualified from the First Amendment lawsuit filed by Disney against the Florida governor and his appointees, claiming the jurist's prior statements in other cases have raised questions about his impartiality on the state's efforts to take over Disney World's governing body. Yeah, statements like matters of law and precedent. That's just too much for DeSantis and his crew. DeSantis' attorney filed a motion in federal court in Tallahassee late Friday, seeking to disqualify Chief U.S. District Judge Mark Walker from overseeing the lawsuit filed by Disney last month. The lawsuit alleges that DeSantis and his appointees violated the company's right to free speech, as well as the contracts clause, by taking over the special governing district that previously had been controlled by Disney supporters after Disney opposed Florida legislation that critics have dubbed Don't Say Gay. DeSantis' motion said the governor's motion was filed a day after Disney announced that it was scrapping plans to build a new campus in Central Florida and relocate 2,000 employees from SoCal to work in digital technology, finance, and product development amid an ongoing feud with DeSantis. DeSantis' motion said Walker referenced the ongoing dispute between his administration and Disney during hearings in two unrelated lawsuits before him dealing with free speech issues and fear of retaliation for violating new laws championed by DeSantis and Republican lawmakers. One of those was a First Amendment lawsuit filed by Florida professors that challenged a new law establishing a survey about intellectual freedom and viewpoint diversity on state campuses. Walker, who was nominated to the federal bench in 2012 by President Barack Obama and is now chief judge of the district, tossed out that lawsuit on the grounds that the professors did not have standing to challenge the law championed by DeSantis and Florida lawmakers. Oh, really? So we got to get rid of them? Weird. In the first case, Walker said, what's in the record, for example? Is there anything in the record that says we are now going to take away Disney's special status because they're woke? In the second case, the judge said, and then Disney is going to lose its status because they made a statement that ran afoul of state policy of the controlling party, according to DeSantis' motion. Now, Disney and DeSantis, as we know, have been engaged in a tug-of-war for more than a year. That has engulfed the GOP governor in criticism as he prepares to launch an expected presidential bid this week. The feud started after Disney, in the face of significant pressure, publicly opposed the state concerning lessons on sexual orientation and gender identity in early grades that critics call "Don't Say Gay," and that's not really quite the accurate description. But anyway, as punishment, DeSantis took over Disney World's self-governing district through legislation passed by lawmakers and appointed a new board with supervisors. Before the new board came in, the company signed agreements with the old board, stripping the new supervisors of design and construction authority. In response, the Republican-controlled legislature passed legislation allowing the DeSantis-appointed board to repeal those agreements and made the theme park resort's monorail system subject to state inspection when it previously had been done in-house. Disney filed the First Amendment lawsuit against DeSantis and the DeSantis-appointed board last month in federal court in Tallahassee, and it landed in Walker's Court. The DeSantis-appointed board earlier this month sued Disney in state court in Orlando, seeking to void the deals that the company made with the previous board. Now, the creation of Disney's self-governing district by the Florida legislature was instrumental in the company's decision in the 60s to build near Orlando. Disney told the state at the time it planned to build a futuristic city that would include a transit system and urban planning innovations, so the company needed autonomy. Now, that futuristic city never materialized, however, and instead morphed into a second theme park that opened in 1982. But there is still a city there, a little town. And some might say it's as futuristic as Main Street at Disneyland. Bobby Cana Calvin of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. Shua Wilmot and Reagan Zelaya, two former dorm directors at a small Christian university in western New York, acknowledge their names are unconventional, which explains why they attached gender identities to their work email signatures. Wilmot uses he, him. Zelaya goes by she, her. Their former employer, Houghton University, wanted them to drop the identifiers in line with a new policy for email formats implemented in September. Both refused and were fired. You mean they can't even use Mr., Mrs., or Miss? Guess not. My name is Shua. It's an unusual name, and it ends with the vowel A that is traditionally feminine in many languages, Wilmot said in a nearly 1-hour video he and Zelaya posted on YouTube shortly after they were let go last month. If you get an email from me and you don't know who I am, you might not know how to gender me. Ongoing culture wars in the U.S. over sexual preferences, gender IDs, and transgender rights have engulfed politics, school campuses, and many other facets of public and private life because there was a Nazi takeover of our government on January 6th, and it seems to still be ongoing. Let's be clear here. In the Northwest, 16 plaintiffs are suing Seattle Pacific University, a Christian liberal arts college, to challenge the school's employment policy barring people in same-sex relationships from full-time jobs. In New York City, LGBTQ students are challenging the Yeshiva University's decision to bar their student-run club from campus. There's a backlash against the rise of LGBTQ rights. Paul Southwick, director of the Religious Exemption Accountability Project, said, but in places like New York and Oregon, that we wouldn't think would be experiencing this backlash. Earlier this year, a federal judge in Oregon dismissed a lawsuit that LGBTQ students filed against the U.S. Department of Education, claiming it did not protect them against discrimination at religiously affiliated universities receiving federal money. Houghton University, an 800-student campus 60 miles southwest of Buffalo, says it offers a Christ-centered education in the liberal arts and sciences, and they take federal funds. Burris of Raw Story brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Ammonium nitrate itself is not explosive, but it's the base component in explosive. It's heavily regulated due to the dangers it presents to the public, so when the company Dino Noble sealed up the rail car for it to be transported from Wyoming to California, it followed all the rules. When it arrived in California, however, it was gone, with the doors still sealed. The New York Times quoted the company's statement saying the initial assessment is that a leak through the bottom gate on the rail car may have developed in transit. Union Pacific was responsible for the transportation, and their spokesperson, Kristen South, explained that they are doing a full investigation. The fertilizer is designed for ground application and quick soil absorption, South said. If the loss resulted from a rail car leak over the course of transportation from origin to destination, the release should pose no risk to public health or the environment. They don't believe any malicious intent is involved in the incident, really. It's just one of many rail leaks, crashes, or spills that have happened over the course of the year. Then there has been heightened attention on train disasters and spills since the Norfolk Southern freight train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio on February 3rd, sending chemicals into the drinking water and the air as they burned off. The Trump administration gutted train safety regulations as part of the request of rail company lobbyists. Trump then traveled to the city for a political rally. The visit prolonged the attention to the dangers ushered in by Trump's relaxing of safety regulations. There were a few other Norfolk Southern train derailments that followed the East Palestine incident, leading to more questions about the company and its practices. Thank you, Donald Trump. All right, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Camp Fail. If you've seen the trailer for Hypnotic, you'll think you're in for an action thriller about a detective looking for his missing daughter. You'll be wondering why Liam Neeson isn't starring instead of Ben Affleck. What you get, however, is something way different. And while being led down surprising paths can make for some of moviegoing's most exhilarating rides, how it's done can make or break a pick that's selling that. This one pretty quickly turns weird when Affleck's Detective O'Rourke and his partner investigate a bank robbery that leads to the discovery of a deep state mind control program that its participants call the Division. Just as with plots based around time travel, once you can't be sure that what the characters you're watching or experiencing is real or logically self-motivated, it's off to the races, straining the boundaries between twist and absurdity. Part of the problem here at first seems like the script, but going deeper, it might be that the concept would have been better served by a streaming series where the onion could have been peeled back at a less than 5 layers at a time pace. The proceedings all seem rushed, and while director Robert Rodriguez has proven himself imaginative and resourceful before, too much of the core mind control theme falls to knowing stares between actors, which may be both time and resource efficient but fails to double down on the creepy. All is not lost here, however. There are some nice visual effects a la Inception or Tenet for transitions between reality and what are called hypnotic constructs, and despite the script limitations, the acting is all fine, with kudos to William Fichtner for bringing off the evil Division agent Lev Delray. While Hypnotic has its moments, its mid-credit sequel tease will likely prove to also be from another reality. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
As you might have heard, heat records are breaking all around the world, from the Mediterranean to South Asia. Most recently, records fell in the Pacific Northwest and Western Canada.
Across British Columbia, residents are dealing with a record-breaking heat wave.
17 temperature records fell on Saturday, with heat advisories sprawling over much of Western Canada.
This is not a usual May. This is not even an abnormally dry May. This is something exceptional.
A few places saw temperatures in the mid-90s. For context, that's about 20 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit above normal.
Today we're talking about heat. It's nearly summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and with climate change, today's hot summers will be among the coolest of the rest of our lives. I'm Scientific American's Earth and Environment editor, Andrea Thompson.
I'm Kelso Harper, a SciAm multimedia editor, and you're listening to Science Quickly. So, Andrea, first things first, how does a heat wave even happen?
Heat waves happen when a high-pressure system parks itself over an area for several days. Under these systems, air sinks, which keeps clouds from forming. And if you don't have clouds in the sky, that means the sun can really bake the surface. Imagine getting into your car after it's been sitting in the sun, and you get the picture.
Right, and this can be really dangerous. In June of 2021, a particularly strong heat wave in the same area contributed to hundreds of deaths.
With climate change, heat waves like this are happening more often, they're lasting longer, and they're likely to become more intense as time goes on.
And heat records are more likely to be broken, and in some cases completely shattered. Normally, heat records are broken by a few tenths of a degree. But last week in Canada near Hudson Bay, which still is covered in winter ice, a heat record was broken by a huge 7 degrees Celsius, or more than 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Temperature shot up 40 degrees Fahrenheit over the average.
But a heat wave doesn't have to set records to feel miserable, especially in places like the Pacific Northwest, where air conditioning isn't as prevalent and where people are less adjusted to heat. And at times of the year, like May, when people aren't expecting them.
Heat waves are also particularly tough on the elderly, young children, and people with health conditions like asthma or heart disease.
And it's not just the soaring high temperatures of the day that pose a problem. Higher nighttime temperatures mean people don't have a chance to cool down, particularly if they lack air conditioning.
And humidity plays a role in our experience of heat, right?
Yeah, as anyone who's stepped outside on a summer day knows, high temperatures cause us to sweat. That's actually the body's natural cooling system, because the sweat cools our skin as it evaporates. But when the humidity is high, that evaporation slows down and can eventually stop.
And with global temperatures rising higher every year, it sounds like the heat waves and summers that are among the hottest in memory today are going to be left in the dust in the future.
Yeah, the summer of 1998 was by far the hottest summer on record at the time, thanks to a blockbuster El Niño event, but it's now the 10th hottest.
Speaking of El Niño, forecasters are expecting one to develop this year. Can you remind us what an El Niño actually is?
Yeah. An El Niño happens when ocean waters in the eastern part of the tropical Pacific are hotter than usual. The heat that releases into the atmosphere shifts around some of the big air circulation patterns that influence weather all over the world. That heat also amps up global temperatures.
And how likely is it that we'll see one this year?
There's about a 90% chance right now, and it's looking like it could be a fairly strong one, which would mean big weather impacts all over the world.
What kind of weather impacts might it have?
So in some places like Indonesia, it actually is a lot drier than normal, and they end up with drought and sometimes wildfires that spew tons of smoke into the atmosphere. In other places, it can cause flooding because of higher than normal rains. And in the Atlantic Ocean, it actually tamps down on hurricane development. And so we tend to have quieter hurricane seasons when there's an El Niño.
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay, so not every summer is going to be a scorcher or hotter than the last one, but it seems pretty clear that we're going to have to adapt to having more hot weather, right?
Yeah, and it can seem like we're powerless to stop it, but we can actually control just how hot the summers of the future are. The faster we bring down greenhouse gas emissions, the less roasting and deadly those future summers will be.
Right, and local policy interventions can help too, like by creating more green spaces in cities or painting building roofs white so they reflect more sunlight.
If you find yourself in a heat wave this summer and want to know how to keep cool, we have an FAQ linked in the show notes. It covers the difference between heat stroke and heat exhaustion, what to do if the power goes out, and at-home heat remedies. Personally, I'm a fan of a nice cold ice pack on the neck, and so is my dog.
Aw, that's so sweet. Last summer, personally, I got by with lots of cold showers, frozen washcloths, and occasionally sleeping in my living room right next to the air conditioner.
You gotta do what you gotta do to keep cool. Thanks for listening to Scientific American's Science Quickly. The show is produced by Jeff Delvicio, Talika Bose, and Kelso Harper. It is edited by Alexa Lim and Ella Fetter. Our music is by Dominic Smith.
If you like this show, please consider leaving a rating or a review. Go to sciam.com for more in-depth news and features on all things Earth and environment and everything else.
For Science Quickly, I'm Andrea Thompson.
I'm Kelso Harper.
Until next time, stay cool.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1969. That was the day that began the first strike of the Chicago Teachers Union. The strike lasted 3 days, but it won teachers a $100 per month pay raise. The school board also agreed to hire 750 more teachers to help ease the overcrowded classrooms that plagued many Chicago public schools. Some of the most important victories of the strike came for black teachers. Prior to the strike, many black educators in the city could not find full-time positions. Instead, they were relegated to a permanent substitute status. In order to teach full-time, the teachers had to pass an exam. The exam included an oral portion. Often the testers would fail black teachers who had moved to Chicago from the South. They called these teachers' Southern accents unprofessional. The oral exam became a way to bar black teachers from advancing to full-time status. In the years before the strike, black educators were organizing around this issue. They also demanded changes to the school's curriculum to better include black history and literature. These black teachers did not gain much support, even from their own union. They began to organize sickouts to demonstrate their commitment to these changes. One result of the strike was an end to the discriminatory exam process. After the strike, the school board agreed to include more African American content in the curriculum. The teacher strike had shown the power of the union. Over the next 20 years, CTU would stage 9 more work actions. Some lasted only 2 days. The longest was 19 days long. In 2002, the Chicago Teachers Union again went out on strike, recalling their historic fighting spirit. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 58 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low to mid 70s, partly cloudy this morning, then becoming cloudy during the afternoon, though it is quite sunny at this moment. Winds will be out of the north at 10 to 15 miles per hour, so rather stiff. Cloudy skies this evening will become partly cloudy after midnight, lows in the mid-40s. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Partly cloudy skies tomorrow with highs in the mid to upper 70s. Winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Grass pollen is rated very high here in the sundown town of Rogue River, Oregon. Yes, indeed. The air quality index for the region is good at 21 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is very high at level 8, so take care. Barometric pressure is currently holding steady at 30.2 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 68%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 65 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 70 degrees and cloudy. Rome is 71 degrees with rain and a thunderstorm advisory that could impact critical electrical infrastructure. Kyiv is 73 degrees and fair. Kabul is 64 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 83 and fair. Tokyo is 62 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 44 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 57 degrees and mostly cloudy, and they have a small craft advisory on the bay and offshore for heavy fog. And New York, New York is 72 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Anonymous staff at the Associated Press, and who can blame them, bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Russia yesterday, Sunday, announced indictments in absentia for a judge and prosecutor of the International Criminal Court who issued a war crimes warrant for Vladimir Putin. A statement from the National Investigative Committee said the judge, Rosario Salvatore Atala, and prosecutor Khan Karim Assad Ahmad are both charged with, quote, preparing to attack a representative of a foreign country, enjoying international protection in order to complicate international relations, end quote. Each also faces other charges. Conviction could bring prison terms of up to 12 years. The committee also said other ICC officials are being investigated. The March warrant against Putin accuses him of personal responsibility for the abduction of children from the Ukraine. The court also charged Maria Lvova-Belova, the Russian Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights. It's the first time the global court has issued a warrant against a leader of one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Talis Azoni of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Vinicius Jr., who was subjected to racist abuse yet again on Sunday yesterday, with the Brazil star saying the Spanish league now belongs to racists. The latest abuse against Vinicius came in Real Madrid's 1-0 loss at Valencia, a match that had to be temporarily stopped after the Brazil forward said he was insulted by a fan behind one of the goals at Mestalla Stadium. It was not the first time, or the second or third. Racism is normal in La Liga. The competition thinks it's normal, as does the federation, and the opponents encourage it, Vinicius said on Instagram and Twitter. The league that once belonged to Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Cristiano, and Lionel Messi now belongs to racists. But I'm strong, and I'll fight until the end against the racist, even if far from here. The 22-year-old Vinicius, who is black, has been subjected to racist abuse since moving to Spain 5 years ago. Real Madrid coach Carlo Ancelotti considered replacing the star forward after Vinicius said fans at Mestalla chanted "monkey" toward him. He said Vinicius initially did not want to continue playing. What happened today should not happen, the coach said. When a stadium yells "monkey" to a player and the coach considers them taking out of the field because of that, it means there is something bad in this league. The veteran coach refused to talk about the game after what happened, saying his team's loss meant nothing. The game should have been stopped, Ancelotti said. This should not have happened. It wasn't only one person, as it has happened in several stadiums. Here it was a stadium racially insulting a player. The game had to stop. I would have said the same thing if it was 3-0 for us. You have to stop the game. There's no way around it. Ancelotti said he first asked the referee to stop the match, but was told that the protocol was first to make an announcement to fans, then take other action if the problem continued. Ancelotti said Vinicius didn't want to keep playing, but he told the player that he was not guilty of anything and that he was the victim. Madrid goalkeeper Thibaut Courtois said he would have left the field with Vinicius if his teammate had decided to stop playing. According to media reports, Valencia has identified 2 fans who insulted Vinicius behind one of the goals. Valencia later said it expected Ancelotti to apologize to Valencia fans for accusing them of racism after misunderstanding what was said. Those comments apparently on social media claim the fans were saying the Spanish word tonto for silly instead of mono for monkey. Vinicius was later sent off after an altercation with Valencia players and gestured to home fans about the team's fight against relegation as he left the field. Valencia took a huge step toward avoiding the drop with a 1-0 victory, opening a 5-point gap to the bottom three teams entering the final 3 rounds. The reward for races was my ejection, Vinicius said on Instagram, along with the Spanish league slogan, "It's not soccer, it's La Liga." All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Terrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.